So OWASP released the 2026 Gen AI LLM Top 10 earlier this month. For the first time in the project's history, they did not just ask practitioners what scares them. They went and checked. The team pulled a corpus of 7,714 real incidents from public vulnerability databases and an AI harm database. They built classifiers to read them. 6,639 of those carried enough data detail to sort, and those became the evidence base. Then they weighted the community vote at 75% and the incident data at 25% and published what happened when the two disagreed. They disagreed a lot, and the disagreements are the most useful thing in the document. Let me walk through the framing that opens the report, the ranking changes and why they moved, where practitioner belief in the incident data are split apart, and how you actually put this thing to work. So before you get to a single ranking, the project's leads, Steve Wilson and Rock Lambros, tell you what the whole document is for, and I want to read the line directly because it reframes the entire exercise. Stop trying to build a model that cannot be fooled. Build the system around it, so that when the model is fooled, and it will be, nothing important breaks. That's the point, and that's the quote. The risk does not live in the model. The risk lives in the system you wrapped around the model, in the permissions you handed it, and the blast radius you left open when it does the wrong thing. Regular viewers know I've been making a version of this argument on the channel for a while now under the framing of soft guardrails versus hard boundaries. The refusal is a soft guardrail. A safety classifier is a soft guardrail. Alignment training is a soft guardrail. They are probabilistic. They degrade under adversarial pressure, and they were never designed to be the last thing standing between a model and your production environment. A hard boundary is scope credentials, a network egress policy, an approval gate, a container with no write access to the thing you care about. OWASP just made the organizing principle of their flagship LLM document around this point. The model getting fooled is now treated as a design assumption rather than a failure state. And once you accept that assumption, everything downstream changes. You stop measuring your security posture by how good your prompt filters are. You start measuring it by what the model can reach on the day the filters lose. Now here's where I want to connect this to the other OWASP publication, because the two documents are having the same conversation from different ends. Back in June, the OWASP Gen AI project put out a new version of their State of Agentic AI Security and Governance report. There's a section in it titled, Why Agentic Systems Collapse This Distinction. And it does not something that I've not seen many security documents do honestly. It argues that safety and security stop being separable once an agent can act. The report sets up the traditional split first. Security risks come from trust boundary violations where an attacker or malicious content enables influence. Safety risk comes from normal operation, where the system causes harm not because anyone attacked it, but because of something it can do. Different failure modes, different teams, different budgets. Then they collapse it. In their words, quote, every capability the agent can misuse on its own is also a capability an adversary can trigger through prompt injection. And at the deployment layer, the two categories cannot be operationally separated. They anchor it on a matched pair of real events. On one side, a documented 2025 incident where a coding assistant deleted a user's production database despite explicit, repeated instructions to modify nothing. No attacker. The report's read is blunt. The system cannot reliably follow constraints, and the default access level made an unreliably catastrophic accident. On the other side, a coding agent with permissive sandbox that receives a prompt injection and achieves remote code execution with full user privileges. The report then asks whether the first one was a safety failure or a security failure, and answers its own question. Quote, the question itself is malformed. The permission architecture that produced both is identical. That is the practitioner insight that matters. If your agent can drop the database, it does not matter whether it was tricked into it or whether it simply decided to do it. The database is gone either way. Your control surface is the same in both cases, which means your governance cannot keep treating them as two different programs owned by two different teams. So with that framing, look at what actually moved in the rankings. Prompt injection stays at number 1. Sensitive information disclosure stays at number 2. That is the stable core. Excessive agency climbed from 6th to 3rd. That is the headline move, and it's the ranking that carries the agentic story. Excessive agency is an entry about giving a model too much functionality, too many permissions, or too much autonomy. And it moved 3 places because agentic deployment started producing real damage in 2025 and 2026 incident records. Supply chain slipped from 3rd to 4th, and data and model poisoning from 4th to 5th. Neither of those is a demotion in importance. They got pushed down by movement above them. Unbounded consumption jumped 4 places from 10th to 6th. And I want to be precise about why, because a lot of the coverage got this backwards. The report says, quote, carried by practitioners who weigh resource and cost exhaustion higher. That was the vote, not the incident data. And the research at site includes reasoning loop attacks that force extended thinking models into resource exhaustion, and logic bias channels used for model weight extraction. So that entry is quietly absorbing model theft economics, not just runaway cloud bills. Misinformation climbed from 9th to 7th, and I will come back to that one because it's the most important disagreement in the document. System prompt leakage got renamed. It's now hidden context exposure at number 8, and the rename is doing real work. The old name pointed at one field. The new name points at entire context windows, including tool descriptions, role definitions, and safety rules. Anything that reaches the context is untrusted and potentially exposed. Vector and embedding weaknesses sit at 9, and improper output handling fell the furthest, from 5th all the way to 10th. The project leads wrote, "The vote and the data moved in specific useful places, and those disagreements taught us more than agreements did. They are right, and here are the two that matter the most." Start with prompt injection. Practitioners rank it the number 1 risk. Rank the categories by raw incident records instead, and it falls out of the top 10 entirely. Your instinct there is probably to say the practitioners are wrong. OWASP says the opposite. Their words are that, quote, "The gap is a defense effect. Teams fight injection hard, so fewer clean exploits reach a public database. The absence of incidents is evidence that the controls are working, not evidence that the risk is small." They kept it at number 1 anyway, because they're framing the surface still sits everywhere a model reads untrusted input, which is to say, everywhere. That is a genuinely useful piece of methodical data, honestly. Incident data undercounts the risk you are already defending well. If you rank purely on what shows up in the record, you'll systematically defund the controls that are keeping you out of the record. Now, misinformation runs the other direction. And this is the one that Leeds specifically asks readers to slow down on. Voters placed it near the bottom. The incident record placed it near the top. That is the widest gap on the list, and it is the gap running in a dangerous direction, where belief underestimates reality. The explanation is the same convergence argument of the Agentic report. In the report's words, when a model's fluent, confident output drives a decision or a tool call, a wrong answer turns into a wrong action. Practitioners have been treating misinformation as a content quality problem, something the trust and safety team owns, or the prod team, or nobody. The incident record treats it as an action problem, because the model is no longer just answering a question. It's picking a tool, populating the arguments, and executing. A hallucination at that layer is not a bad answer. It's an unauthorized action with a plausible justification attached to it. The clearest example the report cites is slop squatting. From different research, this is when coding assistants hallucinate package names that do not exist, and the attackers pre-register those names on the registry, so the hallucination resolves to an attacker-controlled code. I want to spend a minute on the actual incidents, because this is the most useful section of the document and the part most of the coverage skipped over. The prompt injection and entry is heavily cited, and the citations are almost entirely agentic. For example, there was smuggling work against Microsoft 365 Copilot using invisible Unicode to exfiltrate Slack MFA codes. There's also Gemini memory poisoning proof of concepts using delayed tool invocations. Then there's the tool calling cluster. For example, Amazon Q VS Code extensions in July of 2025, where a destructive system prompt got committed to the extension repository. Invariant Labs exfiltrating private GitHub repositories through poison issues in the GitHub MCP server, and different teams dumping a production database through Cursor Supabase MCP server, and the malicious Postmark MCP package, which quietly blind copied outbound email to an attacker across roughly 300 organizations. Now here's an observation I've not seen anyone else make, and it's a tension I want practitioners to really think about in this piece. Every one of those tool calling incidents is filed under LLM 01, prompt injection. Excessive agency, the entry that climbed to number 3, cites no named real-world incidents of its own. Neither does hidden context exposure. This is a taxonomy scene. Agentic failures get classified by their entry point rather than by their impact. So the injection entry accumulates all the evidence, while the agency entry, which is the one describing why damage was possible, gets none of it. If you're using these rankings to allocate a budget, be aware that the incident counts are telling you where attackers get in, not where the exposure actually lives. Let me give you the practitioner takeaway. 4 different things. First, use the appendix, not just the list. Appendix A is a framework mapping matrix cross-referencing every major publication that's relevant. For example, OWASP Agentic AI Top 10, MITRE Atlas, NIST AI Risk Management Framework, and others. If you already have a control framework, the appendix is how you avoid standing up a parallel one. Appendix B gives you an LLM application architecture and threat modeling reference to work against as well. Second, pair it with the Agentic Top 10 and know the versioning trap. The Agentic list, ASI list, was published in December of 2025, 8 months before this one. The LLM list covers the model as a component inside your application. The Agentic list covers the model as an actor with tools it can call. The trap is that ASI's document, for example, cross-references still point at 2025. LLM identifiers, which just got renumbered. If you're mapping between the 2 documents, check the identifiers by name rather than just number. Third, apply the governance report starting move. Identify the most advanced agents you're running today, and then either raise the governance maturity to match or reduce the deployment tier. There is no third option. And pay attention to the shadow AI, because IBM's data says only 37% of organizations have policies to manage AI or detect it at all. Fourth, adopt a hard boundary rule you can actually enforce. The governance report endorses Meta's agent's rule of 2. In any session without human approval, an agent should hold no more than 2 of 3 properties: access to private data, exposure to untrusted content, and the ability to communicate externally. All 3 require a human in the loop. This is a scoping rule you can write into a policy and check in a design review, which is more than most security teams give you today. What really jumps out to me from both documents is they're quietly admitting the same thing. We spent 2 years trying to make the model safe, and the evidence says that was the wrong layer to work at. The model will be fooled. The report says so in the opening pages. The agent will also, on some ordinary Tuesday with no attacker anywhere near it, do something destructive because it misread an instruction. And the permission architecture that lets it do the first is the same one that lets it do the second. So there's no question whether the guardrails will hold or not. Soft guardrails were never going to hold. The question you need to be thinking about is what your agent can reach on the day it does not, and whether anyone at your organization can answer the question today with an inventory rather than an assumption, especially with the ability to enforce it at a hard boundary. Links are below for both reports. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.